Welcome to the Backyard Professor Responds videos. I would like to respond to a claim being made that the Book of Mormon archaeology is just getting stronger and stronger with age and time. In order to do that, I would like to start with a simple analogy that pretty much everybody can understand that will set the tone for the rest of my response to this claim. Let's say a friend of yours who you've known your whole life claims he found in an old 1862 history book this photograph of Abraham Lincoln, and he asks you what you think of it. It's a genuine, authentic photograph. You would say, well, Abraham Lincoln is talking on his cell phone while he's driving his red Corvette down the interstate. It's a full-color photograph, and he's also got his computer open. And so I don't think this is authentic at all. A month later, your friend returns to you with this photograph of Abraham Lincoln, and he says, hey, I found this interesting, authentic photograph of Abraham Lincoln in an old 1873 history book, and this one doesn't have a computer or a cell phone in it, and therefore I believe it's more authentic. How would you respond to your friend? I know I would tell him that this photograph isn't any more authentic than the last one he gave because it still has anachronisms. So he goes away disappointed. Several years pass and your friend returns with yet another authentic photograph of Abraham Lincoln, very excited. He says, look, this one's in black and white, and the historic setting is authentic too. It shows his log cabin in the background, and he's on a dirt road. He's not on an interstate. This authentic photograph really is impressive. How would you respond to your friend? No, this is not an authentic photograph. It may not have 204, say, anachronisms in it, but it still has about 34 anachronisms in it, and therefore I don't accept it. This tells us something very important about anachronisms that I would now like to discuss while I respond to Ward Radio's Book of Mormon Archaeology getting stronger and stronger.
The very first prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, nowadays commonly referred to as the Mormon Church, translated a book called the Book of Mormon that purports to be of ancient origins. And from its inception, the critics of the church, specifically the critics of the Book of Mormon, have pointed to what they perceive as anachronisms of an evidence of its fraudulent nature or its pious fraud or it's just he was crazy. And we've seen different lists, some of them saying there's 200 of them or 300 of them, but as time goes on, any forensic scientist, any investigator, any detective will tell you that frauds only look worse over time. You're saying that the reverse is happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Of these 200 anachronisms in a big way, we're finding more and more and more and more evidence that actually supports the possibility of Lehi's journey as stated in the Book of Mormon and as translated by Joseph Smith than any evidence against it. So that's a very bold claim, obviously.
All right. Show us what you got.
Which is now the Book of Mormon.
Which is now the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
And so when this book was published, actually, there were many. In 1830. Since then to now, from 1830 to now, there's been about 204 anachronisms that have been brought up by the critics.
You would say alleged anachronisms.
Exactly. They were at the time when they made these claims. There weren't evidences for these 204 things, but since then, 170 of them have been proven to not be anachronisms. So that stands with only 34 more that exist. So this Joseph Smith guy, because here's the claim that he made, that there was an ancient book that was of ancient origins, and he translated by the power of God. And the book that he translated had 204 things that didn't exist at the time, at his time.
Yeah.
And now that's been changed. Like, now we see that 170 of them actually did. And so either he was good at guessing 170 unique things in the Book of Mormon thus far, or maybe he was telling the truth.
So first things first, they do make a claim, but they present no data with that claim at all. No evidence whatsoever. Number one, there's been considered 204 anachronisms. That is an astonishingly huge number of anachronisms in a historical document. They claim that 170 of these have been proven to be not anachronistic. Who is doing this proving? And in what study? And is this just Mormons who are refuting these anachronisms? Do they have a basis of someone outside the faith who is an expert in whichever anachronism they are disproving? And do they also agree with the Mormon scholars that the anachronisms, yes, this has been refuted, that is not an anachronism in the Book of Mormon? Is this the level of proving the anachronisms are not anachronisms that they are claiming? Or is it just Mormon apologists who are claiming that they have discovered something that refutes the anachronism, but the rest of the world is still in the dark on? They don't know. They don't say, I should say. I don't know. But a claim like this needs hard data to back them up. The other element of this particular discussion that is laughable is they obviously misunderstand the true nature of anachronisms. Let me say it as simple as I can. Anachronisms don't have quantity as their power. They have quality. An anachronism is absolute. If there is an anachronism in, say, a historic photograph, like in my analogy at the beginning of this response, or if there is an anachronism in an historical letter or a book, etc., that anachronism entirely 100% demonstrates that that is not an authentic book or photograph or article or letter, whatever it is. It is not a case of beginning to help a document toward authenticity that you are refuting more and more anachronisms. So far as I am aware, and they confessed this, 34 anachronisms remain in the Book of Mormon. That is still an ungodly, gigantic number of anachronisms in a historic document. I don't know of anybody who claims Herodotus had that many, or Thucydides, or the Anabasis, or Caesar's Gallic Wars. No historical document that I'm aware of, including the Bible, has even 34 anachronisms. That should be telling these gentlemen something.
The infield expert in which we brought with us, named Jim Gee, he's been doing work over there for about 25 years now, and he's become really good friends with all the antiquities experts. And in his private collection, he had a Damascus steel sword with a silver hilt that they chemically analyzed that dated back to 6th century BC. 6th to 9th century BC. So within 300 years, fits the narrative perfectly with the Book of Mormon, showing that first off, steel exists. Second off, it was made into sword form. And third, that precious metals were used as hilts and during that time period as well.
That's all very interesting, but it's all just coincidence. And I know I can hear many Mormons objecting, saying, oh, you're just too negative to accept anything that favors the Book of Mormon. This is where the misunderstanding of the absolute power of anachronisms plays its hand. With those 34 anachronisms, which substantially prove the Book of Mormon is fake, all evidences that are ever found is going to be able to be chalked up as coincidences, not significant at all, because that's the power of the anachronisms. It didn't matter in the black and white photo with Abraham Lincoln with his anachronistic Chevrolet. the historical background, the cabin instead of the interstate, the dirt road. None of that authenticates the picture. And David J. Hand's book, The Improbability Principle, fundamentally demonstrates that really wild, in fact, impossible coincidences happen all the time. It is the law of the universe. We like the order, the step-by-step processes, etc. We want to be in control. The universe doesn't care what we want, and it doesn't care what we think. Coincidences, really absolute, fundamental, improbable coincidences. Joseph Smith could not possibly have known this or that, etc. And now we have evidence for it. All of that is coincidences, so long as those 34 anachronisms reside in the Book of Mormon. That's the problem that Mormon scholarship faces, and it's the problem that they misunderstand anachronisms that completely destroy any evidences they may come up with, because we are morally, we are intellectually, and we are physically justified in rejecting the authenticity.
It's by doing that, by holding both the critics and the pro Book of Mormon literature in your hand, that you can get a clear vision. And so that's what we're trying to do with this project, because unfortunately a lot of people aren't reading these days. I don't know if you've noticed a lot of the reading.
If it's not on
TikTok,
really low. It does not exist.
Exactly. If it's on a Netflix miniseries, then most people aren't going to
even
consume
that's
it,
too long.
What I mean? Yeah.
Even that's too long. I only watched the highlights of the Netflix miniseries on TikTok.
So essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to share these evidences and both perspectives in a way that is consumable by most people these days, right? Because people will sit and they'll watch, a 5-episode miniseries on a bunch of serial killers and they'll just consume that in one night, right? Well, maybe we can provide something that's a little bit more uplifting and has a little bit more value than just than the majority of media, and give that to people so that they can, make a decision on this very, very, I understand how bold this claim is, but we should at least take it seriously. And so what we're trying to do is show that there is enough preponderance of evidence that people should take it serious enough to at least read it and engage with the text.
It is not a bold claim. It is a completely ridiculous claim in light of the absolutely gigantic number of anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, 34. You notice I'm granting their assumption that 170 of those anachronisms have been refuted. We have seen absolutely no evidence whatsoever that that is in fact the case. So I'm being very generous in saying you still have 34 more to go. But once you overcome them, if you overcome them, then you have to backtrack and demonstrate with scholars outside your religion that all those anachronisms are agreed upon as not being anachronisms. For instance, the case of George Throckmorton comes to mind. For those of you who don't know, George Throckmorton was the forensic analyst who fundamentally proved the Mark Hoffman forgeries completely false. Now, I've got several books, A Gathering of Saints, but Mormons didn't like this one, so they called it anti-Mormon. So if you want to get rid of a book, label it. So that's an anti-Mormon book, so I can't use that book as an example. This book by Silto and Roberts, fabulous coverage of the Mark Hoffman murders. That also can't be used because Mormons think they're too liberal. So you see, they didn't like the way they wrote that book, so they said, well, that's too liberal. So that excused them from accepting the conclusions of that book. This one by Stephen Nafe and Gregory White Smith, The Mormon Murders, this is just upright anti-Mormonism, and therefore the Mormons won't accept it if I use that book. So I'm going to use the one Mark Hoffman book that Gordon B. Hinckley gathered the gentleman, Richard E. Turley Jr., victims. And Gordon B. Hinckley, it was said, told Turley, you tell the whole story, you hold nothing back, and you tell everything. So this is the one Mormons only will accept. The other ones they won't. Even though they word this better, I will give the example of George Throckmorton's attitude. Got to take my glasses off. The next day, Throckmorton returned to the church office building, bringing with him William J. Flynn, no relation to Shannon Flynn, a document examiner from Arizona who was not of the LDS faith. Earlier, Glenn Rowe had spoken to Throckmorton, who would be examining the documents. Throckmorton, Rowe noted in a letter to Dallin Oaks, is a member of the church. He has indicated that they are bringing in at least one, if not more than one, investigator from out of state who is not a member of the church, so that their conclusion may not be questioned as biased. George Throckmorton had the right idea. Now, these two gentlemen have the correct idea. They run the YouTube website, The Stick of Joseph, by the way, so you know. They have the right idea. They want to weigh the critics. They want to look at the plagiarisms and anachronisms. And then they want to show the LDS side. They want to show both sides so that people will enjoy the text more, that will have a more realistic picture. This is a good start, but it's not the total package. The total package will be when you can show us in explicit detail every one of those anachronisms and where they are located in the Book of Mormon, so that we can see that you're not artificially inflating the claims up to 204 of those, because that is overwhelmingly impressive, and it would be absolutely astoundingly testimony building if LDS scholarship can whittle those down to just 34. That's where you misunderstand anachronisms. However, we need all of that documented. Who is doing it? What studies they have produced demonstrating the evidence that the anachronisms have been refuted? Who are the non-Mormon scholars? Who are the Mormon scholars? Are they experts in that field of the anachronism? And when you can finally get down to just one anachronism using this method, you need to realize and grasp that you still have a 100% fake document. It's not about numbers. It's not about making progress toward a more and more authentic Book of Mormon. It is as if you have a credit card in debt of $100,000 and you're paying 19% interest on that credit card. And on the other hand, you are saving your money in a savings account. You put $200 toward the interest of the credit card, and you put $200 in the savings account. You only look at the savings account imagining that your savings are accumulating, and it's an entire illusion. You are getting nowhere fast until you completely get out of debt. The anachronisms would represent the debt. You're not free until there are no more anachronisms. And we are morally and intellectually and spiritually justified in rejecting all of the evidences you can present. That is the fact you need to come to terms with.
And before the commercial break, you said naysayers claiming that there could be no steel swords of ancient origin, like the Book of Mormon purports that there was in the hands of a man named Laban, wielded by a prophet called Nephi. The recent archaeological inquiry, very recent, has actually shown that you didn't need a blast furnace to do it, and that the ancients weren't dumb, and they actually had indeed made steel all the way up from the Crusader period of Damascus steel to about 900 BC. They're finding archaeological examples. And that's one of these anachronisms, or meaning one of these archaeological doubts, shall we say, that somebody had of the ancient origins of the Book of Mormon that you were able to kind of debunk.
Yes.
So were there any others that you came up with, or are you just a one-trick pony?
No. Yeah, that was it. Oh, no, I'm just kidding.
It's like, that's it. We're going to cut the commercial break right now. Okay, keep going. What else you got?
Come on, that was good. That was funny. I like their spirit. I like their attitude. Now, of course, they're buoyant because they are living under the false illusion, the hallucination, that they are really making progress toward authenticating the Book of Mormon, than which nothing is further from the truth. So they're all bubbly and excited. And this, quite frankly, is giving them a great deal of notoriety, and it's making them some good cash on the side anyway from their YouTube channel. So, of course, they're going to have fun, they're going to joke, etc. But I want to see them address those 34 anachronisms. And I want to see them overcome the philosophical objection as well as the objections I have presented in this response of why I entirely reject all of their evidences as coincidences at best. Lucky guesses, yes. Joseph Smith was telling the truth? No, not when he claimed this was a valid historical document. The anachronisms refute his claim. Even if he spoke by the power of the Holy Ghost, he was wrong. That's what I want to see them begin to address.
You can tell from the grammar of the Book of Mormon that that was a pre-existing name, not one that they came up with.
Yes, and it was an existing place. Now, at the time of the Book of Mormon, when the Book of Mormon was published, there wasn't a place called Nahum, like an existing place.
Especially known to the Western world, and it's kind of hard for us to understand that with our Google Earth and Google Maps. Just right.
So like so many other Mormon apologists and scholars on YouTube and on the internet, these guys demonstrate they aren't a one-trick pony, they're a two-trick pony. The only stuff they keep bringing up is this steel sword, which is coincidence, and this idea of Nahum, which is also a coincidence. And I don't even have to bring up the world-famous debate between Phil Jenkins and the BYU scholar and farm scholar Bill Hamblin, where Bill Hamblin saw Philip Jenkins decimating the Nahum issue, the archaeological issue, in his article called The Nahum Follies. So Hamblin thought he would go over there and slap him around, and Phil Jenkins mopped the floor with Hamblin. He absolutely decimated and wiped him out. And so far as I am aware, Phil Jenkins' argument and evidences still stand. Now, that can be found on the YouTube or on the internet exquisitely easy. Type in The Nahum Follies, and it'll take you right to it. And you can read for yourself. It was an extended discussion. You can see Bill Hamblin getting frustrated because Phil Jenkins would not go down all of his silly apologetic rabbit holes and non sequiturs and red herrings. Phil Jenkins stuck to his guns, and he destroyed the Nahum argument. But I don't have to go to that. I'm not going to rehash it. A lot of us are already familiar with it. It'll bore you. I'm going to take the new and even more different, powerful tack. With 34 anachronisms still unaccounted for in the Book of Mormon, Nahum is entirely a coincidence. Now, I happen to agree with Phil Jenkins that that particular direction of argument wipes these two guys out with their so-called Nahum archaeological evidences. It does nothing to verify the Book of Mormon. But I'm taking the other tack, so now this is a 1-2 punch that I'm contending The 34 anachronisms in the Book of Mormon leave these guys completely without an anchor. They are a ship floating on the sea of desire, hope, and testimony, completely floundering when the tidal waves of coincidence overwhelm them. Let's see what else they've got.
For thousands of years. Yeah. Okay. But there's other smaller areas that are mentioned, just like the New Testament might mention Capernaum or might mention Syria, and the Old Testament might mention, Canaan or Lebanon or Jericho. Yeah. You're saying the Book of Mormon mentions specific cities, one of them called Nahom, and that there have been ancient maps that have correctly identified the place of Nahom, correctly spelled and in the location that the Book of Mormon says that it is and should be, and this all matches up archaeologically.
Yes, and what I will say is that like
that is a bold claim. Yes. Made in the bold claimed town, awesome town.
Now they stopped. Okay. They stopped. So they stopped adding Nahum on maps by the time that the Book of Mormon was coming out. So I think
again, all coincidences. In light of the fact that this book is riddled with hundreds of plagiarisms, we've been given no evidence that it's any less than that until we actually see the breakdown and details of those discussions and those validating affirmations that the anachronisms are not anachronisms. We can only accept the fact that they've said there are 204 anachronisms. If they whittle that down to 34, it's still absolutely insurmountable. This is what they don't get. So everything they're going to present from now on, this is my valid response. The remarkable thing is, see, the Mormons have a way of attempting to intimidate, perhaps scare people. They say, well, the Holy Ghost is not going to continue guiding you and being with you if you wound it with your doubts or your skepticism. Or they might say something along the lines of, well, Satan is getting a mighty hold of your heart. He is beginning to darken your mind. Or they might even just say, well, your issue is really, the truth is, you just want to sin because you can't live the higher moral standards of the church. And so you want to justify yourself so that you can go sin, have some beer, have some sex, go gambling, party it up, etc. They'll attempt all of these various ways to kowtow you into stop carefully using your mind and exploring the evidences. Just believe what you're told. The church has done a masterful job of manipulating of minds in that regard, and that I also reject. And so let's see what else they have.
Before the break, we were talking about a place called Nahum, which is an archaeological evidence. So in the narrative, from Nahum, they travel nearly eastward, and they travel through this big desert called the Empty Quarter, and it's the largest sand desert in the world. They sojourn there for 8 years, and then from there, in the Book of Mormon narrative, they end up in a place that they called Bountiful. Now, at this place, they describe how it had many fruit, and it had honey, and it was tropical and lush and beautiful, flowing water, and all of this.
Does it use the word tropical? Isn't that kind of a modern
term? It doesn't use tropical.
No, but it indicates that it had that.
That's just the flavor. If it were a video game, it'd look like the background of Donkey Kong on N64.
So none of this is actually new. This is not the first time this has been done. These two intrepid explorers are having the time of their lives, retracing the trails that other LDS scholars have taken, and it is discovered and discussed in the Journal of the Book of Mormon, Volume 7, Number 1, 1998, in the Book of Mormon Studies. Oman, is that the Bountiful of the Book of Mormon? And in this Journal of Book of Mormon Studies, Volume 15, Number 2, 2006, various issues of the Wilderness Trek in the Old World setting, Lynn Hope, Warren P. Ashton, Richard Wellington, George Potter, S. Kent Brown. They also took that same journey. I do believe this is Salala, the area that they're talking about. They have wonderful, sumptuous pictures. They show the various interesting maps of Arabia and where the hypothetical place that Lehi went. Oh, there's There's one of the altars in the desert that they talk about. That's true. And they're trying to get us to accept the fact that Nahum altar has Nahum in it, etc. All of this information Philip Jenkins destroyed in his argument, The Nahum Follies. Believe it or not, it's amazing. Whether he did or didn't is also entirely 100% irrelevant to the stubborn yet fatal fact of the anachronisms. All of this gorgeous stuff about shipbuilding and Lehi's Trail and the old places where they traveled through the wilderness, etc. All of it's documented, gorgeous photographs and all, and it's all coincidence because of those 34 anachronisms. I'm not being hard-headed or stubborn or difficult. The nature of an anachronism is absolute. It only takes one. And it is irrelevant if it is a one-page letter, a 34-page research paper with footnotes, or a 500-page book, such as the Book of Mormon. Size, length, complexity, intertextuality, and language issues. None of that has any relevance whatsoever to authenticity if the book is riddled with anachronisms. If there really were 200 anachronisms in a 500-page book, we are talking an anachronism every 2¼ pages throughout the text. That is insane. If you whittle that down to 34, that is still a historic anachronism every, 14 to 17 pages? That is insane. There are not that many anachronisms in any of the ancient Roman materials that we have that existed. There are not that many anachronisms in what remain in the Mayan codices. It is just breathtaking. And even that misses the point. One anachronism is the complete killer of authenticity. I'm going to drive that point home because the Mormons want to convince the world that that is not the case, yet it is. You can give me a purported photograph of Abraham Lincoln with 10,000 historical verifications, but if he's sitting in his Corvette, none of those verifications support the picture to authenticity. Just that one anachronism destroys all of the historical materials all at once, totally. There's no relativity with an anachronism. Well, it could be 50% less fatal if it's this kind of an anachronism. You don't get any of that with the anachronism. Abraham Lincoln, pictured with a cell phone in his hand, proves that kind of a photo is 100% fake. That's the law of the anachronisms. I need to drive this point home because I've seen Matt Roper talking about this. I have seen Stephen Smoot talking about anachronisms this way. We're making great progress, and they get people built up and excited. We're moving forward with this. We need to pray about the Book of Mormon and have faith. No, we don't. We are 100% justified in rejecting it. Now, if we happen to die, and the Book of Mormon is genuinely authentic, and it is so important to God that people come to know this Book of Mormon and accept it as true and live by its principles, my response to the Lord when he says, "For Pete's sake, I gave you all those evidences. Why didn't you believe?" is going to be exactly Bertrand Russell's response. Not enough evidence, Lord. And you had the capacity and the capability of bringing it out. And you didn't. That's how I would approach this. Let's see what else these gentlemen have.
I said, we're hitting upon, and we've only talked about 3 of them. We probably have a dozen or more that we're hitting in the docuseries of just like these crazy quote unquote guesses that the critics would say are guesses that would have to have had happen in sequential order in order to, say that the Book of Mormon is false. You have to say that he guessed all these things.
Okay, and
which is just wild to believe.
In the pre-show, I think one of the things you'd mentioned about is how you really like analyzing and investigating some of the critics' complaints here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now, this also might be ignoring another angle. Rather than critics just saying, oh, well, Joseph Smith got a lucky guess, the apologetic argument of, well, how could Joseph Smith have known, is also changing. While these gentlemen present the theme that we are finding, we've only presented 3, and they always present just those 3. But there's many, many, many more. We've got at least a dozen more direct correlations with the Book of Mormon from this Arabian Peninsula theme. We also now know that more and more sources that Joseph Smith had access to are showing up that weren't available in the 1900s to the 1970s also. So this is a double-edged sword. It may not have been guesswork after all. It's just that these days we're beginning to find that Joseph Smith had access to far more sources than we have known. Let's keep watching. I'll explain that.
You mentioned that a lot of people have criticized the idea of building a ship and leaving Yemen or Oman or whatever that land of bountiful was because there was no wood and there was not a tropical area. But you said that you actually found a place that was a port city that traded in wood, or what was the deal there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different theories, and that's a thing that's super interesting about this series is that because it isn't like a direct, like this is what happened, this is what happened, and this is where it happened, there's a lot of questions that can be asked about, or there's a lot of room for people putting it forward different theories. So one of the theories is in that area of Oman, where Bountiful is, where that tropical area is, there was an ancient port city that exists for, we don't know how long, but at least 1000 BC, that was called Korori. And Korori, they traded in giant timbers from the India, like across through the Indian Ocean from India. And they also worked in iron and steel and all of that in that area. They found tons of forges. So the idea that there would have been material there to build a ship, there would have been maybe even people to teach Nephi, Lehi, and his family how to build the ships and all that. Like it's a total possibility. And that's at the end, what we're showing is that everything in the Book of Mormon is just as much in the realm of possibility as anything in the Bible as well. And that still isn't enough because you need to garner that spiritual witness, which can only come from reading the text.
Yeah.
Fun stuff, you have to admit. Now, a lot of it is deeply speculation. Of course, yeah, because that's all you have. That's why they deal in possibility, and what we need is probability, and they can't give it to us. The interesting thing is the preponderance of evidence of having 34 anachronisms throughout the text is more than enough to justify saying, this is just a coincidence, conclusion. It's a good guess, whatever. But that's assuming that Joseph Smith was entirely ignorant of this area. And are we safe to make that assumption? Because at one point, Hugh Nibley's main defense of the Mahuja Mahija information in the Book of Enoch was that the Book of Enoch was not available to Joseph Smith. Now, that has been changing. We now have some evidence that Joseph Smith very well could have had access to the information in the Book of Enoch, thanks to the Erie Canal as being the main highway of information that no one had taken into account before. We also have the preponderance of evidence of Joseph Smith's sources when dealing with his translation of the Bible, which did not come by revelation, which did not come by inspiration of the Holy Ghost. It came from Adam Clarke's Bible commentary. Now, the remarkable thing is, these are the BYU scholars. Thomas Wayman did a major research project in the BYU studies, showing, without question, Joseph Smith was cribbing from Adam Clarke's Bible commentary to get his unique ideas about the Bible to enhance his own prophetic prestige in the eyes of his contemporaries. So, more sources are beginning to be shown Joseph Smith had access to far more than we have understood, and therefore, this argument that this philosophical stance, the historical stance, that, well, Joseph Smith couldn't have known that. Now that we do know that, it shows he was a true prophet. That's giving way to further light and evidence that's being found that Joseph Smith, in point of fact, did have access to that information, or this information over there, or that information over there. The undeniable fact is, those anachronisms, they are absolute. They are 100% proof that the book is not a genuine ancient historical document. This is the elephant in the room. This is the unclimbable cliff that apologists have to try to scale. And they're trying to give us the impression that this cliff is just so huge and they've climbed up a rope. They got a rope hooked up 22 feet high, and they've climbed that 22-foot rope, and we're making great progress. In the meantime, we'll just go with what we have. Entirely misconstruing the issue. And that's what I object to. And I'm not angry about it. I'm rather amused at the gymnastics mentally that they have to perform in order to. The other thing I have serious questions is the creative use, I will put it that way, of many sources, which Phil Jenkins caught so many apologists on in his excellent discussion called The Nahum Follies on the internet. So, no, this does not convince me. Now, I confess I have not seen their documentary series. I have not, and I'm not going to either, because on their own admission, there are still so many, vastly more than there ever should be, from a book coming from God, of historical anachronisms, that there's no reason to even watch their documentaries. And I'm not dissuading those others who wish to watch it. You go right ahead and watch it and enjoy. I have more important things to do at this point until I see those 34 anachronisms refuted in the manner in which I've asked for them to be refuted, which is only fair, using George Throckmorton as my example of how the apologists should be doing that, with arm in arm with the world scholars, so that it can eliminate Mormon bias and confirmation bias. I have my doubts they'll do it that way, because they're not interested in the truth. They're interested in strengthening people's testimony and getting pats on the back and getting their ululation and all that jazz. And they do pretty good with that. If that's what they're satisfied with, then more power to them. Me, I want the truth. It's that simple. And I'm not getting it from Mormon apologetics. And that's unfortunate for them.